Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on earth. I'm your host, the Game Master. And before I really jump into this one, I have to apologize in advance. I hope I don't cough. I've had a couple coughing fits this morning before I started recording, and I'm right there on the verge of getting sick. I know it's the season. So I've been taking those vitamin C tablets that are immune boosters or whatever they call them. I've had pretty good luck with those over the last few years where I'll start to feel a little sick. I'll take those tablets, as much as I can, and then I don't get sick. So hopefully that's the case. But I apologize in advance if I cough. It's kind of hard to talk for an extended period of time and not cough. The other thing I wanted to talk about is I've been doing this countdown to New Year's. And my goal was that by the time we got to 2025, we were going to be totally caught up to the modern day and the new games that we play every week and stuff like that. And I realized, though, that that means right before Christmas, I was going to have to drop a video called Blackest Night / Marvel Zombies. And I feel like it is the exact opposite of the mood many people are in this time of year. It's like you couldn't pick a thing with less Christmas spirit, so to speak, than Blackest Night. And then the flip side of that same coin is like, for instance, I myself have seasonal depression, right? So that's not great for me doing doing that video either. So kind of no matter how you look at it, I really didn't want to do that. So I'm going to save that until after Christmas. That means we're not going to be able to count down and perfectly end right at New Year's. We're still going to be playing catch up a little bit in January, but that's okay. I need to let go of how anal retentive I can be about the dates and things like that and go a little with the flow more than I usually do. So there were some stories that I could be telling and I wasn't. And I thought, Christmas is a pretty good time of year to tell these stories, actually, because some of the stuff, there are some issues with tone, and I'm going to be talking a lot in this video about tone and like genre rules and how you can do a crossover the right way and how you can do it the wrong way. And at any rate, I think this is a really good time of year to do that. And before I get into some of these more toy centric stories that we've done in our game, I wanted to start with the crossover that went wrong, actually, to kind of lay some groundwork or to build a foundation off of so that then when you hear the other stuff, hopefully it will strike the chord that I want it to, right? That you'll be more receptive to it. So I think I should probably mention at this point that in the early 90s, me and everybody else that played our role-playing game loved X-Men, the animated series, and Batman, the animated series. Those were like the two big ones. And they both had action, right? They both dealt with other stuff too. Like, my favorite Batman villain of all time is Mr. Freeze. And it's all because of the episode of the animated series that's his origin story. I don't know if you've ever seen it. If you haven't, drop everything you're doing and go watch it. It is insanely well done. I don't think I've ever seen a better superhero story ever, period, than that episode. And spoiler alert for whoever hasn't seen it, he's trying to save his wife, and the guy who runs the company, voiced by Mark Hamill, I believe in terms of the order in which they were recording things, they didn't think he could do the Joker. They weren't taking him seriously. And then he did this role and it changed their mind. But um he's a businessman who only cares about money, to the point that he's willing to let people die if he makes more money. And honestly, I feel like we live in an era now where we're seeing an awful lot of that. I won't go off on a big tangent about it, but there are certainly some big corporations that I'm not a fan of. I'll put it that way. But I mean, it wasn't just like a two-dimensional cartoon. You know what I mean? It The storytelling had depth. And X-Men, of course, Stan Lee went on record at one point. He said that Magneto was based on Malcolm X and Charles Xavier was based on Martin Luther King. So there's certainly some gravitas in the X-Men animated series, right? And so both of those were huge inspirations for our role-playing game. And so in our game, the superheroes had to just worry about stuff like paying their rent and having something to eat. And so let's say they work at a job somewhere and something happens, right? Something goes wrong, whether it's like a natural disaster or an invasion or some major crime or whatever it is that requires the attention of a superhero. The way we always kind of framed it is like, what do you tell your boss about why you suddenly have to leave during work? And you go deal with the thing, which for a lot of people would maybe be the whole game. For us, we really spend a little time on like, okay, so after you deal with the thing, do you go back to work that day? What do you tell him? What does he say to you? Are you fired? Can you not pay your rent now? Can you not buy groceries? We were really big into things like consequences, right? So, so our game had a certain tone. And you get to, I don't know when we would have played this, maybe 1996, somewhere in that general ballpark of time. And we had been doing round robin GMing, which is where different guys around the table on different weeks show up and they run a game. And then that way everybody gets to play some. And so I was playing John Redbridge because, of course, I was. And he's kind of the through line for the whole game. It's what connects everything. But at any rate, so I was playing him, and at this point in the story, there's a bunch of John Redbridges because of the split power. And this particular one goes by the moniker of Titan, and he wears a white costume with red trim. And so Titan hears a disturbance at the local zoo. And he goes there as well as a bunch of other superheroes who were original characters. They weren't DC or Marvel characters. They were just stuff that the players came up with. But they were all very serious superheroes, and we've been reading comics like, Watchmen and Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns and I don't know, Venom and Ghost Rider and all sorts of stuff, Punisher. So that was kind of reflected in who these original characters were, right? And so we're at the zoo, and there was this guy. You know how like Poison Ivy is kind of an eco-terrorist in a way, and but her whole deal is plants, right? She doesn't like what's going on with vegetation, basically. So she does things that kind of hurts people, you know? So the guy running this particular adventure was a guy named John. And so he took the poison ivy idea, um, but instead of flora, it was fauna, right? So she was upset about animal related stuff and had turned all of these zoo animals loose because she thought it was wrong for them to be, behind bars. And then that meant that the lions were free to start eating kids in the zoo. So the superheroes don't like that, and they show up to deal with this. So, John Redbridge, aka Titan, is doing stuff like getting a lion in kind of a like a sleeper hold kind of a thing and trying to deal with this mess. And for a lot of the characters, they were street level heroes. Dealing with stuff like a lion or a gorilla is like challenging, right? So we're doing this. And one of the guys gets swallowed by a giant snake, like an anaconda or whatever, swallows them. And you've probably seen pictures online at some point of like huge snakes they have in other parts of the world, and they eat like, I don't know, a zebra or something. And it's got like a big lump in it. That was the case here. One of the heroes who didn't require oxygen, he could survive in the vacuum of space and stuff like that. He's inside this snake. So he's alive, but he's in the snake. And the guy running it says, the snake's digestive juices, it's the acid power, and it is slowly eating away at this guy. So you need to get him out. And we're like, okay. So we kind of deal with everything else because the digestive thing is so slow and he has enough hit points and blah, 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 blah. So we deal with all the other problems and we're trying to get this guy out of the snake when along comes Darkwing Duck. And we liked the Darkwing Duck cartoon. We all loved it, actually. And that is why the game master was flabbergasted when people started saying stuff like, "That's it, I'm out." They would get up and walk away from the gaming table. We had a pretty good sized group. We were playing it at the college. Back then, there were a bunch of guys without cars and stuff stuck on campus. So, like, we had good turnouts at our games. And where we were playing on campus, it was very, very close to where they had just built a brand new Burger King. And I haven't had good Burger King food in ages, but this place was brand new at the time, and I don't know if they were trying extra hard or what, but like it was amazing. It was like the best Burger King you've ever had. And so I remember a couple of guys were like, F this, we're out, because it messed with their suspension of disbelief. And they're like, we're gonna go to Burger King and get a Whopper, and we're gonna run a real role-playing game. And if anybody wants to come play a real game, we're gonna do that there. And I remember the game master, John, his feelings were hurt. He was completely confused. And so maybe a fourth of the guys left just the instant Darkwing Duck showed up. Because, like I said, we'd been inspired by stuff like X-Men, the animated series, and Batman, the animated series, and so on and so forth. And we thought of those things as serious. And we thought of Darkwing Duck as kind of cartoony and ridiculous. And it's fine on the Darkwing Duck show when all the other characters are cartoony and ridiculous too, right? It was a fun show. But to drop them in the middle of our game felt weird and wrong. And John didn't get that at all. I don't think John had ever heard the word cone. I don't think he had any grasp of like genre rules or any of that. And I've been surprised over the years. I'll meet guys in their 40s who have never heard any of that, you know? Um, so I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus. I just think, different people have received different educations and stuff. Not every school stresses the same things. It's not important to them. So, for instance, I knew a guy named Scott. He had never heard of genre rules. Um, so I remember we beat the bad guy. We saved the guy who's been swallowed by an anaconda. Um, we end up putting the villain into a cage because some of the heroes were nicer than others, and some of the guys who were the least nice had just been blasting zoo animals with um, laser beams and stuff like that. And some of the cages were available, I'll put it that way. So we put the villain in one of those cages, and then I remember my character talking with this Darkwing Duck guy and being like, "So, what's your deal, man? Like, where did you come from?" And the guy running the game, it was just like giggling and didn't really answer the questions at all. So if you would try to, because like we wanted clarification, because we were like, okay, well, so in Marvel, for instance, they have Howard the Duck. And like if you look at the Howard the Duck movie, for instance, it's not like the Roger Rabbit movie where he's a cartoon surrounded by live action guys, right? Like Howard is live action, or like Ninja Turtles. If you look at the original 1990 Ninja Turtles movie, they are for sure live action things. Like if they got a cut, they would bleed. Um, Unlike say Roger Rabbit, where everybody's made of ink and paint and stuff like that, right? So that's kind of what we were asking Darkwing Duck is like, so are you like ink and paint or do you bleed or what? And John just kept giggling and he's like, I'm a duck. I'm a duck. And we would ask John, we'd be like, well, how tall is he? I mean, is he like the size of a cat? Is he like, a real duck? Or is he like about my height? Is he half my height? Like, what's going on? And John would just kind of giggle and he wouldn't really say much of anything. And so that game kind of just fizzled out. And like everybody was frustrated, everybody was mad. I remember John was like, "Do you want to know how many experience points I want to give you guys?" And everybody was like, "We don't even care, John. We don't even care at this point." We are so turned off by this entire process. Um, and I remember a bunch of guys looking at me because whether something was going to be continuity or not was on my shoulders. Even when somebody else was the GM, it's kind of like they're sort of a guest in my house was sort of the vibe, you know? And so they were looking at me like, hey, real GM, this doesn't count, does it? Like, surely there's no way this is continuity. And I was like, well, let me talk to John. I'll get back to you. We'll see if we can spin this some way. And John was just completely taken aback, completely surprised that that didn't go over well. He thought it was going to be just the greatest game ever. And and so I remember the following week I had to run a game that was a follow-up to that game. And so everybody was really curious and everybody showed up, including the guys who went to Burger King. And by the way, I told them, I'm like, hey, you could have been nicer, you know? I'm a big fan of a movie called Buckaroo Banzai, and he has a great line in that movie that I'm trying to remember how it goes now, but it's something like, don't be mean. We don't have to be mean. Um, I really like that. So I was saying stuff like that to these guys, like, hey, chill out. That's John's first time being a GM. Obviously, it didn't go well, but there's a little something called constructive criticism that is different than kind of giving him a verbal slap in the face because you didn't like his make believe that he was serving up that week. Um, so the following week, when I went to run the game, I kind of shocked everybody. I'm like, all right, so Darkwing Duck is a member of the party now. And they were like, "What?" And I was like, so we take him back to base and we run some medical tests and we take some of his blood. And it's funny how sometimes it's just something small starts to help. And so they're like, "Okay, so he has blood." He's not ink and paint, you know? And so we end up finding out this is not at all Darkwing Duck. This is actually a Ninja Turtles style mutant animal. And that there is this company, and I ought to know the name of the company. It was like Vilifax or something. But there's this company who has been creating mutant animals in a lab and abusing them. And that was part of where the villain from the previous week had come from. Was he had been a scientist working in this lab and he kind of snapped and he didn't like how they'd been treating animals and so on and so forth. And he went to the zoo and the Darkwing Duck character followed him to the zoo. So it's starting to make a little more sense in a way. And but I'm like, this is like the Ninja Turtles. He's not a toon, he's a mutant animal. And thanks to a bunch of abuse and stuff like that, he's got mental problems and he has decided to be the real world's Darkwing Duck, or however you want to frame that, you know. They started to like that a whole lot more, you know. Um, so so in the end, yes, it was continuity. It just wasn't quite continuity in the sense that John wanted it to be, but John was kind of just thankful to kind of be off the hook in a way, and he was cool with it. And everybody moved forward from there, and we didn't let John run any more games. Um, but that that started this thing though in the game where we would do crossovers with other stuff, and I would actually get a surprising number of requests for a crossover with something that you would normally never think of doing a crossover with. And oftentimes it would be some sort of a cartoon animal, you know, and they would want some representation of that in the game. And so one of the things I started doing is I started thinking, okay, well, let's say it's a gorilla. Let's say it's like a cartoon gorilla. I would start going, okay, well, but like, let's think about real gorillas for a minute. Like, because if we're going to make this thing real somehow, what are actual gorillas like? And like, they can rip your arms off. You know what I mean? Like, they're a problem. And so I started to approach things by saying, what if this thing was a problem? And now, if it's some sort of heroic character, then maybe it's a problem for villains. Maybe the heroes have to go in and be like, whoa, tone it down, buddy, you know? Or maybe it's the other way around. Maybe it is a villain and we just make him a problem for the heroes, like, say, Mojo Jojo from Powerpuff Girls. I did a Powerpuff Girls thing at one point, and the way we framed it was more of like, you know how Cadmus makes clones of Supergirl? That was the vibe. Was you know, there were these clones taken from DNA of other female superheroes, and I can't remember now. I'm not a huge Powerpuff Girls guy because it was kind of after my time. But in the opening to the show, they mentioned something called like Chemical X or Element X or whatever it was. And I had kind of decided, I'm like, maybe that's just Supergirl's DNA. You know what I mean? But we started to do that. Another thing we started to do is when in doubt, run it through a horror movie filter. So we would take something um that had not been serious at all before, and we'd say, okay, so if this was a horror movie, what would that be like then? And even if it was just to get us out of that mindset we were in before and start thinking about what would this be if it was like gritty and realistic, you know what I mean? That was helpful. And then typically we would have to dial it back a little. We'd be like, okay, so now if you can imagine, you know, that the snorks are piranhas, they're all taking a bite out of you at once, you know, or the fear and the panic that you experience when you see their stupid little things sticking out of the tops of their heads and they're going through the water like a shark's fin. They're coming right at you, you know. We we would we would kind of do that. And I found the horror filter was like super useful. And we would kind of reimagine things. We even got into actual tunes. We brought Toontown into the game after the Darkwing Duck adventure. I know that in terms of where it appears in our timeline, that was a video I did a long time ago. But we play them out of order, right? So when we're, for instance, telling a story that takes place during World War II, we did not run that game during World War II, right? We weren't alive yet in World War II. So the date we play the game and the date when the games are set are unrelated. But in real life, after John ran the Darkwing Duck game, I did the Toontown thing. And just using Roger Rabbit really helped because it helped people understand, okay, so I'm live action. This thing is not. This is something that like the characters like Mixia Spitlick have used animate image on this thing, that's, Mighty Mouse or whatever it is, and are now it's running around in three-dimensional space with me, even though when I look at it, it looks like a tune, we are not the same, that kind of thing. So that was very helpful. And that honestly then opened the doors to a lot of stuff we did that I really, really like. Um, I'm gonna do a video about Rainbow Bright of all things because it was something my wife loved as a little girl. She wanted to play Rainbow Bright, and so we ran it through kind of a filter. So our Rainbow Bright game seemed like kind of a mashup of like Supergirl and the Green Lanterns, kind of, and it was cool. It went really, really well, actually. But I won't talk any more about that now. I'll save that for that video. But yeah, um, I think this is a good place to stop. I hope that you've enjoyed hearing about this. Uh, if so, as always, smash that like button, check to make sure you're still subscribed, and leave us a comment. Let us know, have you done crossovers in your game? Did it go well? Did it go poorly? Why do you think that is? Have you had to play around with kind of the tone of a thing, or have you tried to transplant a thing from one genre to another? I'd be curious how you tackled it. I like when we have conversations about that stuff because then we can all kind of learn from stuff and cherry pick what we think is the best approach. At any rate, that's it for me. From everybody here at the longest running superhero role-playing game on earth, we hope you guys have a happy holiday season, and we'll see you in the next adventure.